Evil clones, clones who came from symbiotes, and heroic clones created by supervillains. Welcome back, Nerd Squad. It's me, Amanda, and we have this and more ahead as we count down the top 10 superhero clones we cannot believe exist. Which clone do you think is the most insane? Let us know. Number 10, Spider-Woman Ultimates. Spider-Woman is a weird one because I never thought I'd see a version of her character that was a clone. The Ultimates did something very different with her character by tying her unapologetically and very firmly in her origin to Peter. Typically in the comics, Jessica Drew has been very much her own character, a spider-themed hero, sure, but otherwise completely different and separate from Spider-Man. She got her powers from her father experimenting on her at a young age, or in some versions of the story, fighting to save her life from radiation poisoning. And in the canon history, she actually is older than Peter, so she's not really considered a copycat of him at all, at least not in canon, because in canon she came first. However, in the Ultimates universe, Jessica is actually a female clone of Peter Parker, sharing all his memories and even his love for Mary Jane, which all his clones initially also share. So she really couldn't be closer to him and his origin, which is pretty weird to think. The opposite of her 616 counterpart, as she's literally a female clone of Peter Parker. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button. Why not do it? I know there's a lot of you that are not subscribed. And for those of you that are subscribed, good job. You're great. Just pat yourself on the back. But the rest of you, click the button. Come on. Do it. Number 9, Superboy. Superboy is one that we all think of, I'm sure, when we think of iconic superhero clones. I know I do. But when you break down his origins, it's pretty wild to me that this guy even exists. Superboy is Kon-El, more commonly known as Connor Kent. Connor in the Prime Earth continuity was treated as the adopted brother of Superman, but in reality, he's actually like his genetic son, or at least in part. You see, Connor was not just created using Superman's genetic material, but also the genetic material of Superman's nemesis, Lex Luthor, as well, making Connor actually like the son of both Lex and Clark. Really weird to think about. And that's the part that is, you know, the weird thing I think here. Two characters who are enemies sharing a son in a weird way in Connor Kent's Superboy. In the New Earth continuity, Connor was created by Project Cadmus to be a government-controlled replacement for Superman after he died fighting Doomsday. Fortunately, Connor was freed before he had any failsafes put in place to control him. Number 8, April Parker, MC2. April Parker is the clone of May Parker, or is it the other way around? Norman Osborn cloned May when she was just a baby and had one of the two placed in stasis. But which one was it? He had claimed that the being in stasis was the original May Parker, regardless of who was real and who was the clone though. The one held in stasis was basically treated as the clone, as she was also genetically altered and melded with the symbiote, although one that didn't have a consciousness, so she doesn't have to worry about like sharing a mind with it. After a brief time fighting against Spider-Girl, she would be welcomed into the Parker family, adopting the name April, a play on Spider-Girl's name, May. April would pose as May's cousin at school, and the fact that she exists and also at one point I think was kind of also Norman is a whole weird, it's just weird. Her existence is strange, but you know, still like April. Number 7, Jarro. Jarro is one of my favorite clones personally, but I cannot deny he's also super weird. He's not a clone in the sense that he's a straight copy of another being with like the same memories or anything like that, but he was grown from genetic material that Batman retrieved from Starro the Conqueror, so he's like a little clone of Starro. Jarro is by far one of the cutest sons that Batman has. That's right, I said sons. Batman raised Jarro, and as such, Jarro does think of Batman as basically his dad. Jarro was trained like Batman's other sons and Robins, and often has been seen working as an ally to Batman and sometimes the Justice League as well. He is extremely loyal and will pretty much do anything that Batman asks because he trusts him implicitly. He's also literally the cutest Robin around when he deigns to dress up as such. And if you are trying to tell me that there's another Robin that's cuter, not true. Jarro is the cutest one. Number 6, Kaine Parker. Why is Kaine a weird clone? Because I feel like I don't even have to answer this, but I will. Because he is one of the most 90s characters around, and I say that with much love for both 90s comics and for Kaine himself. But even as a fan of that time period in comic history, I can admit that it was all pretty much a weird mess. I mean, that is a big part of the reason why I love 90s comics so much. Kaine Parker is of course the clone of Peter Parker's Spider-Man. He was created by the Jackal as a first first attempt at cloning Peter, but of course, as he was such an early attempt, he was by no means perfect. In fact, he ended up being kinda just the opposite. Kaine was known for being a defective clone as a result of the fact that Jackal attempted to create an even more powerful version of Spider-Man. This worked, but basically overcharged Kaine, and as a result, he started to degrade over time, pretty drastically too, becoming more paranoid and insane as his mind deteriorated while his powers would burn out. Number 5. Bizarro. Bizarro was a pretty wild idea for a character if you ask me. Bizarro is the clone of Superman, or at least sometimes he is. I think for the most part he is, but he also has his own planet that he's from, that he ended up, I guess, being adopted to, and there's Bizarro World, and there's lots of weird stuff with Bizarro. So, I mean, it does kind of depend on which version of Bizarro we're talking about, because there's been a lot of Bizarros, and many versions of Bizarro's story, as there have been many versions of this character, even some sharing the same continuity. He is a clone of Superman, created by Lex Luthor. But in many cases, the cloning or duplicating process goes awry, resulting in a sort of reverse Superman. Instead of him having heat vision, he has freezing vision. And instead of him having like an ice breath, he has like a heat breath. He's like inverted. He thinks bad is good and good is bad. He also is often not too bright. There has also been a version of Bizarro that was created by Joker, and more recently there was an incomplete clone version of him that was created by Lex, but actually became super intelligent, which kind of goes against what we usually know of Bizarro. Smart Bizarro. I like it. Number 4. Selim. Or Selim. Whatever you prefer. I like to say Selim because it sounds like a real name. Selim is basically evil Miles Morales, because everyone needs an evil clone, right? I mean, his name is literally Miles spelled backwards, so that tells you kind of what this character is about. He was created to believe he was the better version of Miles as Spider-Man. As a result, he constantly wanted to fight against Miles to prove himself, even when Miles tried to help his clones by finding like a new place for them in the world, not wanting to fight Selim or any of the others. Selim, however, couldn't let go of his own pride and forced Miles to fight against him, even going so far as to kidnap Miles' little sister. After losing, Selim was unable to accept that he might not be the best version of Miles and ended up taking his own life, also sacrificing the life of another of Miles' clones, Mind Spinner, at the same time, who he got rid of for betraying him, leaving Shift as the only known surviving clone of Miles Morales. I just think it's a little weird that Miles had to have his own clone saga, but hey, you know what? I like Shift, so I'm not against it, but it was a weird thing. Number 3. Match. So get this. I didn't even know about Match until I was doing this list, and then I found this guy and I just had to share him with you, which you may already know about Match, but I don't, and I definitely think he's weird. Match is a clone of a clone. He's the clone of Superboy. He is basically the Bizarro Superboy, at least at this point in history, and was intended to be part of the Agenda's clone army they were amassing. There have been a few different versions of him in the comics, including a version from the Prime Earth continuity who recently was a member of the Suicide Squad. This version initially believed he was actually the original, but later learned that he was in fact the clone of the original Connor Kent. While Match is typically depicted to look more akin to Superman's clone Bizarro in terms of how his skin coloring looks and stuff like that, he initially was depicted as a blonde or kind of a white-haired version of Connor when he first debuted in issue number 35 of the 1994 Superboy series, appearing on the cover in the following issue. Also, every time I learn about something I don't know from Superboy, I'm like, I need to go back and read this 1994 series because it seems awesome. There's probably so many things in here that I would love. Every time I go back and visit an issue, I'm like, this is great. Number 2. Gwen Stacy from the Ultimates. Gwen Stacy isn't really considered a superhero in the main continuity, and she isn't really even one in the Ultimates continuity either. However, after she becomes a sort of cloned version of herself, or her previous self who died, she kinda is. And in many alternate realities, versions of Gwen have also become straight up superheroes. So for these reasons, we're gonna count her here. In the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, after Gwen dies, she returns as a sort of clone of her former self who is tied to Carnage, who killed her, but who also resurrected her. You see, because Carnage was the one to, well, I guess, eat her, you could say, she was able to live on in a way within the symbiote, who absorbed her consciousness and was affected by it, basically like recreating her. In essence, Carnage then became like a new version of Gwen. Struggling to control Carnage, Gwen became a captive for a time of S.H.I.E.L.D., who basically put her through like therapy. Eventually she would gain better control, only to have Eddie Brock siphon away her symbiote, turning it into a now more powerful version of Venom once he had fully assimilated it. But freeing Gwen and reducing reducing her to simply a normal girl thereafter, or at least a semi-normal girl, as she was still technically a clone and lived through, of course, all that madness, so I'm sure she was very changed by the experience of dying and then being a clone. Number 1. Hush. In the Batman Beyond reality, Hush is actually a clone of Dick Grayson? Yep. This was also part of Amanda Waller's plot to ensure the future had heroes by not only having Batman secretly cloned, who we'd come to know as Terry McGinnis, but through also cloning his sidekick and mentee, Dick Grayson, at least in this reality. Unfortunately, in this alternate Batman Beyond reality known as Hush Beyond, this clone actually becomes resentful of the Batman legacy, seeing Terry as an imposter, and turns dark when it comes to his approach to vigilantism, believing the only way to really handle criminals is through eliminating them permanently. Not a direction you'd expect Dick Grayson to take, but I guess when you're cloned, sometimes things go weird. Especially when you're cloned and you're like, wait, aren't I supposed to be Batman? Who's this kid? That's about it for this one. That's all I have to say this time. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay nerdy, YouTube.